as a starting point? Okay, great. That's good. The other thing I want to do, this is to get you all a little bit active. I want to take a picture of you just saying one word. And some of you may have answered Victor's question, why you do what you do with this word. And I'd like you to all just to first of all, raise your hands. This is actually going to be a video. And just shout out the word growth. I want to hear the growth. Growth. One more time. Great. Because that's what we're going to be talking about. And this is the result of a lot of work that we've been doing in collaboration with Babson College, some of you know, but also independently. We set a very ambitious mission for ourselves almost 10 years ago, and that is to actually increase the economic prosperity of regions, and through entrepreneurship ecosystems. You've heard that word a lot, but we also set a very high bar. We would have to do this rapidly, in 4 to 5, 6 years. It'd have to be measurable. It'd have to be inexpensive. It'd have to be replicable, a methodology that can be used elsewhere, not just in one place. It'd be relevant for the normal economies that Victor was referring to. And that's extraordinarily ambitious, especially when you think about what is an entrepreneurship ecosystem. We use this word a lot. This is my very, very, very simple cartoon of what an entrepreneurship ecosystem is. But I want it as background, just as a way of confessing this is very complex and ambitious stuff. I'm going to try and package it into a very small and short package. Now, one of the first most important things, you've heard already this morning the word entrepreneurship used in many different ways. And alignment, the kind of community building that Victor referred to, is impossible when you get leaders together. Leaders, and these just happen to be elected leaders, they're leaders of all kinds, use the word entrepreneurship in different ways. And some of these ways, in fact, are mutually exclusive and contradictory. So one of the lessons that we learned is we have to reframe the problem in very specific terms in order to accomplish our mission. And one of the reframings was, rather than help grow more and more new firms, which is, again, this has been referred to by others, which is 99.9% of what we refer to as entrepreneurship, rather it's to help more and more firms get that word you mentioned before, new growth. And the reason is that it's through new growth that we create prosperity. That means wealth, that means jobs, that means paying taxes, that means the kind of inclusion that's been mentioned several times already today. So we had to define or redefine entrepreneurship in a very specific way. And it's not the right way to define entrepreneurship. It's a useful way to define entrepreneurship. At the individual level, it means more and more rapid growth. The relentless search for growth, whether it's 0 to 10, or 10 to 50, or 50 to 1,000. And from a regional perspective, it means more and more companies growing more and more rapidly. By the way, all of the data all over the world show that the more companies growing you have, the fewer startups you have. More on that later. I know that surprises you. But in a word, entrepreneurship is growth is scaling up. So we kept our mission, but from all those learnings, our strategy changed. And that is to scale up regional economies, specific areas around the world, by helping more and more firms grow more and more rapidly to the point where it catches on. That's what I'm going to be talking about. How that happens, and I'll just do it in a very few minutes. So first of all, scaling up some of the facts. You know what, I'm going to go through this very quickly just to save time. And this is the research again. And by the way, it's true, I'm a professor, I confess. But for 15 years, I built and ran a company, a global company in Israel. I've been a general partner of a $75 million venture capital fund. And the biggest expense I have after buying, well, even before buying South African wines, I have 43 bottles of wine in my room upstairs, is investing in startups. I love wine too. Your wines are amazing. Amazing. So first of all, scale-ups are not later stage startups. In fact, the average high growth company throughout the world is a couple of decades old. And again, I know that surprises you because you've heard really smart people like myself say the opposite. But these are the data. They can be second generation, third generation. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. They come from all sectors, of course, including digital. I wouldn't be here saying something bad about digital, but a lot of them actually come from food and retailing and distribution and logistics and finance and construction and all the other the so-called boring industries. They grow sporadically. They don't follow this nice, neat, let's call it even a fairy tale of getting the idea and testing it in the market and getting a little money from your family and friends and then going to some angel investors and then getting some more customers and then getting it. In reality, any of you who've actually built companies, it doesn't work that way. It's sporadic, it's jerky, it's up and down. And then finally, I'll just say this. I know these things warrant a lot of conversation. Quantities of local scale-ups create quality of local startups. When the growth dog wags the startup tail, the tail wags better. So let me just give you some quick examples. I'm going to skip over. This is just, it's a generics pharmaceutical company. Started out 6 years ago by purchasing a $37 million asset in the United States, an asset that was unproductive, and built it in 5 years to $640 million of sales. Last year, they broke $1 billion. This was funded, by the way, but personal debt by the person who bought the company. He borrowed $50 million at 22% interest rates. Now, this is Iceland. This isn't Africa or India. Another example that you know about, Netflix. Almost all of the growth of Netflix has occurred in the last 5 years. Almost all. This is a local example of a grocery store that turned into a fish, local meaning local for me. Turned into a fish store, turned into a fish restaurant. The sons took it over and they grew it into what's now a big food chain, 5,000 employees. Those are jobs. And they're becoming more and more innovative as they grow. The growth drove the innovation, not vice versa. So, in a word, what we're looking for, not as unicorns, we're looking for what I call workhorses. So how do these projects work? And I'll be very brief and schematic about it. They work on 3 levels. And I'm talking about local projects, and I'll give 2 examples. Level 1 is demonstrating growth quickly, that growth can happen quickly. Not in 4 years, and 5 years, and 10 years, but that your company, which now has, let's say, $500,000 of revenues, can double that within a year. And I won't go into the details now, there's no time, but just some facts. We've now run 150 companies in 4 completely different economies of small to mid-sized businesses, the entire spectrum of age and sector. We've had 10 cohorts, and as I said, different economies. Almost all of them have had almost immediate growth events. 3/4 of them doubled their revenues within 2 years. When you double your revenues, that means you're paying more local suppliers, people have salaries that they spend locally, you're hiring more people, and if you're really, really lucky, you're paying more taxes. Bad word, taxes, but it's actually a good word. So this is just a very quick, can you press the button there to get this started? Because I'm afraid I won't be able to. I'm going to skip it. So the second level is it's not enough just to have that new growth happening locally in your community or your city or your state. It's not enough. If it's not talked about, it doesn't have an impact. It's like the tree in the forest. If it falls and no one hears it, then it doesn't make a sound. Well, that's not exactly true about growth, but if growth happens and people don't notice it, it doesn't have nearly as much impact as when people hear the growth stories locally. Believe me, it's not a natural act anywhere in the world to talk about growth. It's something that has to be learned. And in part, it's learned by recognizing what it looks like. And these are just examples. These are examples of the 1 runs and the 2 runs, not the 4s and the 6s, or in the US we say the base hits, the singles. Growth looks like new customers, new contracts. Growth looks like hiring new people, building capacity, getting new equipment. Growth looks like having better cash cycles, having more free cash to invest. those things can happen in a very short period of time if they're done well. So for example, the second level of our scale-up projects, we teach people how to tell growth stories. As I said, it's not a natural act. I increased my sales by getting a contract for $100,000 from Marks & Spencer. And that's going to double our sales next year if we fulfill that contract. Those are real growth stories. So we have programs for teaching the entire community to learn how to communicate about that growth. And then level number 3. It's the hardest level of all. It's engaging the ecosystem stakeholders. Now, it turns out that these nice bubbles that I showed you early on of policy and finance and education, these are actually made up of people, and Victor hit the nail on the head. These are individuals you can see, you can talk to, you can influence. And they happen to fall into categories or cross-categories, but these are people and they have different goals. That's important to realize. So the publicly elected and the public officials, they want jobs, dignified jobs. They want you to pay your taxes. On the other hand, the financial actors, they want to have better return on their debt portfolios. And the university professors, they want jobs for their students. They want donors, they want grants, they want intellectual capital. And the corporate executives, they want talent, and they want access to innovation, and they want local supply chains. The culture impactors, the journalists, the media, the people who communicate as you did, they want to have more content to reach bigger audiences, and so on and so forth. So and of course the entrepreneurs, they want wealth, impact, and recognition, a variety of, not only wealth, but wealth is important. And so programs to stimulate the investment by the ecosystem leaders can be systematically engaged in, whether it's growth barometers or policy councils at the policy level, or helping the financial actors develop new kinds of financial instruments that actually can be used where there aren't stock markets that you can list your companies on, or helping the culture impactors speak the language of growth, and so on and so forth. The message again being that you can systematically intervene in each one of these 3 levels. So, let me give you a couple of quick examples of how this has actually happened. Manizales is a small 500,000 low middle income city in the remote areas of Colombia. 5 years of hard work by them. I know you can't read these. I'll give you the high-level facts. 1,300 jobs created just by the companies participating in the Scale-Rated program that I mentioned. 10% of the entire jobs that were created over 5 years in the city were created by these scalers. Over 1,000 new contracts, not the consumer selling coffee contracts, but these are enterprise customers. 19,000 participants in new events. And the growth of these are the growths of each of the 4 cohorts that went through. 88%, 34%, and it wasn't just limited to a few outliers. These are the median growth scores. The cost, less than $1 million of public funding, about $3.5 million to date. Milwaukee, similar results, similar program, exactly the same methodology, exactly the same concepts. Economic engagement now of just the companies in the Scale-Rated, not those they impacted as well, but just those companies is $250 million, and by 2021 it'll reach $1 billion. When $1 billion grows by 10%, that's $100 million of new revenues. Those are thousands and thousands of new jobs, created not by investors, but by customers. These are sustainable jobs. So, to wrap up, some lessons that we've learned from actually trying to take ideas and put them into practice in normal regions around the world. The singular focus on scaling up is helpful. It enables alignment. Growth is its own incentive. You don't have to provide hard incentives to companies that grow. Support, celebration, communication, training, these are the soft incentives. And growth, the good news is that it has broad benefits for many stakeholders. Even though they have different needs and different objectives, growth addresses many needs. It's not a panacea, but it addresses many needs of many different stakeholders. And then, if you take care of the scale-ups, if you have the dozens and hundreds of companies growing more rapidly in your region, the startups pretty much take care of themselves. You know, the investment in startups is a little bit like a colleague of mine's metaphor. Ricardo Harsman says, it's like looking at a flat tire and seeing that it's flat on the bottom and looking for the hole where the tire is flat. The hole is probably somewhere else. The hole of prosperity is in the scale-ups, not in the startups. So the final lesson is, of course, it's possible to change the culture of growth with language, with communication, and with actual examples of more and more companies growing more and more rapidly. So in conclusion, looking back at the last 5 years, I think by now we have a methodology that is rapid, it's recordable, measurable, it's efficient, it's replicable, relevant, and robust. It's applicable and self-sustaining. And now there are scale-up projects going on in 10 different countries around the world, all with an obsessive, singular focus on only one thing: getting more and more companies here, in our place, in our home, in our community, growing more and more rapidly. That, again, it's not a panacea, but it turns out then when you look at the urban centers around the world, those with sustainable growth have lots of local companies growing more rapidly. So with that, I'll thank all of the organizers. I hope I stayed within my time limit, and I hope you have a great lunch. Thank you.